So what is deep learning? It's part of machine learning. And you might have heard of those terms like logistic regression or random forest. And those are the names of relatively simple machine learning algorithms. And deep learning is not those. When people say that they used deep learning for image recognition or segmentation, they usually mean that they used a neural network. And when you hear the term neural network, you might think of a biological neural network. We all have one. And we take an input, like looking at somebody's face, and I say, oh, that's George, that's the output. And you can look at another face and say, oh, that's Stacy, or I don't know that person. And we can do this all day long. It's really easy. But if you were to sit down and write a code to recognize somebody's face as George's or Stacy's, that is not a trivial thing to do. So back in about 40s, some people thought that, well, if we can explicitly code how to do what we do, maybe we can make a program that mimics the biological neural network and let it do its thing to learn how we do what we do. So you can put an input into an artificial neural network and take an output, and you can have some hidden layers in between. And by the way, most of the neural networks people use for image recognition or segmentation have multiple hidden layers in between. And that's where the term deep learning comes from. But anyway, the beauty of artificial network is that this can handle a lot more complex and sometimes even abstract decision-making process. It can learn how to do what we do. And I want to show you an example of image segmentation. So this is a CT scan done on a piece of fabric. And if you look at this closely, you see thick fibers, they are coming from the main fabric, and also thin fibers, they are coming from the threads going through this fabric. And even with our eyes, we can barely tell the difference between the two. If you look at its cross-section, it's a little bit more clear. Those are main fabric, and this is one of the threads. And it's pretty much impossible to use traditional thresholding to segment this image and tell the difference between the main fabric and the thread. Even with the machine learning, it probably is not gonna work. And that's because the main fabric and the thread, they have about the same gray level. So you need a little bit more sophisticated way to segment those two as two different phases. And you can train a neural network to do this. And a well-trained neural network can segment this image like this. And you can see that the main fabric and the threads are clearly separated as two different phases. And this is just one cross-section, but this is the original 3D CT scan image. Again, you can barely tell the difference between the main fabric and the thread, but well-trained network can separate them into two different phases. And as you can see here, deep learning is a very powerful way to do image segmentation. And you might wonder, well, then why don't you use it all the time? Well, the thing is, it takes a little bit of work to train a network. So if you're going to analyze very similar data sets repeatedly, it makes sense to spend a little time to train a network to do the segmentation very well. But if you're going to analyze something different every day, I think machine learning is probably a better choice because machine learning training doesn't take a lot. So we barely touched the surface of deep learning. If you want to learn more about it, there are a lot of good resources. And we will put links to those resources I'm going to show you in the following slides on the Rigaku webinar website. So you can go there and find those links. The first one is a lecture by Ian Goodfellow. He is the author of the famous book, Deep Learning. And he gave a talk to go through the first chapter of his book. And this is a very good introduction of deep learning. You can kind of get an idea what it is and how it works. So I highly recommend his lecture, and it's on YouTube. If you're interested more in how, let's say, a program, a software can do image segmentation using deep learning, then I would recommend this recorded webinar by Mike Marsh from ORS. ORS is the company that makes Dragonfly, which is the program I use to create this webinar. And in this recorded webinar, you can see how Dragonfly uses deep learning to do image segmentation. Now, to use deep learning or neural network to do image segmentation, you don't necessarily need to understand how exactly this algorithm works. You can just pick a network and train it and use it. But a lot of people who are listening in today are probably scientists or engineers, and you might be just curious about how it works. If that's the case, I would recommend this on the YouTube channel series by 3 Blue, 1 Brown. This series has 4 YouTube videos explaining neural networks. And I can't take credit for finding this one. Scientists from Dear Vision, Gwen Tron, told me about this a while ago. And since then, I watched the same series multiple times. But 3 Blue, 1 Brown does a great job explaining how neural network works. And he goes through some equations that are used in the program, and you can almost get an idea how this is coded. So if you're curious about the whole algorithm, I would recommend Neural Networks series on YouTube.